Encounter is brought to you by the Broome County Council of Churches, where we connect compassion with needs as we inspire growth with dignity. You'll find us in special places throughout the community. For those who remain hungry, we provide meals. For those who are challenged, we build wheelchair ramps. We comfort those who are ill, minister to those who are confined, and we remain an advocate for change and understanding on behalf of every element of our community. Connect and inspire. Encounter the Broome County Council of Churches.
Good morning and welcome to Encounter. I'm your host today, Joe Sellepack. One of our oldest programs at the Council of Churches is our hospital ministry. It started when two ministers were trying to figure out how they could give each other respite and being able to go on vacation. So these two ministers basically came together in their congregations and started talking about how they could give their various congregants a seamless pastoral care whenever they went into the hospital. And these two ministers began to bring in others, and then others joined on board. And finally, we ended up with 106 congregations who all supported hospital ministry. And from that, we began to hire a chaplain. And our chaplains have, since I've been at the council, I've been there for 15 years, have kind of gone from Betty Pomeroy to John Koopman to Greg Johnson. And now we're at another transition point where we're still maintaining the program of working in the hospital and wanting to offer hospital pastoral care inside of the UHS hospitals that are here at Wilson and at Binghamton General. So how important do you think hospital ministry is for people within this kind of situation that we're living in these days?
So first of all, I'm Reverend Rachel Helgeson, and you all might have seen me before as an encounter host. And I'm actually making a transition from serving in that capacity to now serving as the Director of Chaplaincy at UHS through the Broome County Council of Churches. So that's why Joe invited me sort of as like a transition for you to see that my role is changing here in the community. So Joe, I think it's very important. I think a lot of times people assume that chaplains are simply for whatever denomination or faith tradition that they come from. But that's not the point of chaplaincy. The point of chaplaincy is to walk with people along on their journey, wherever they are. If it's on a faith journey, if it's from a humanitarian perspective, for some it's in those deep moments of grief or where someone is nearing the end of their life. For others, it's in those pivotal moments when they get a diagnosis and they're working through that. So it's also for the staff.
Right.
A lot of times we forget that the staff is like on high alert. So I think chaplaincy is more inclusive than just considering it to think about it from one faith tradition. So, yep.
Yeah, my guest today is Rachel Helgeson, and I am excited that you have taken on this new role of hospital chaplain with the Broome County Council of Churches, and it is a different position, that, of course, than encounter host, and we're very sad to lose you as an encounter host. It's been great having you on. How many years have you done that?
Let's see. I moved to the Southern Tier about 5 years ago to be the pastor at Northminster Presbyterian Church. So it's been 4.5 years because I started six months after I started in the area at Northminster as a pastor. So I can't believe how much time has flies. I'm just surprised, actually.
It is very much a surprise. It hits me too. When I start thinking 15 years, that's how long. And I'm almost 16 years in. When I started, I had very brown hair, and now I'm gray. It's just very, very interesting, And I was 39 when I started here, and now I'm 55, and people still tell me I'm young, but I look at them and I go, you don't have to live in this body, right? Anyway. But yeah, hospital ministry. It's interesting, you know, when people start thinking about hospital ministry, you know, they say, well, you know, it's just basically praying with people before surgery or other kinds of things like that. And it is that. I mean, we don't want to minimize that, but it's far more than that, isn't it?
Yeah, it's being present with people. I think prayer and meditation are part of that, being present with people. But a lot of times, I think we try to fill up space with words. I mean, that's what we're doing right now, right?
Right.
Which is a good thing when we think and contemplate. But also there's times when we really just need to be present with people and to see them just as they are.
Right.
And sometimes there aren't words for that. It's just there's something to the human presence of one another, to see the divine in one another, that chaplains can bring into those moments. Some in high conflict, sometimes in high emergency, sometimes in just when, I mean, we came out of the pandemic, and I wasn't a chaplain at that time, but I've heard from my colleagues who were, how hard it was to do ministry because they weren't able to physically go touch people.
Right.
I mean, I don't mean like in a creepy way. I mean like simply like just to be in the same room as them. And you forget how important that can be. And that's where I think chaplains are able to see stuff that the rest of the world doesn't necessarily get a bird's eye view of.
And even wearing a mask, it doesn't offer the same type of presence that you had before the pandemic. There's something about a mask that kind of inhibits you being like I've met people with masks on, and now I'm seeing them without masks on, and I'm not trying to get political at this level. I'm just saying that the recognition and the humanity of the person is different when they have to wear a mask versus when they don't have to wear a mask. And it seems to me as if, you know, the role of the chaplain is kind of inhibited by some of the practices that we have to do. And not saying that it's wrong or anything. It's just
it's different.
It's just different.
It's very different. And it'll be interesting to me because my own pastoral ministry has been during the pandemic, but my chaplaincy work prior to this time was pre-pandemic, so I know that there have been shifts. I'm aware of it. I mean, I go to the doctor too. Just,
right.
You know, like I have folks who are in the medical field, so I know that. And even as a pastor, trying to go do pastoral visits, so it's been different. So it'll be interesting to me to see those shifts, the good and the different. You know,
right.
And all of it because we had a global pandemic.
Right. And mental health issues have probably taken a much larger role, don't you think? Or
oh, absolutely. There's so much statistics about domestic violence being on the rise. And even though the quarantine part of the pandemic has been over, there's still, because of incoming economic issues, there's been a huge rise in domestic violence, mental health concerns, people that didn't necessarily realize that they had mental health concerns that finally got like a microscope over top of that. And for some, that's been really helpful because they're able to get the help that they needed. But for others, it magnified something that they weren't getting help for. And unfortunately, the Southern Tier doesn't have as much mental health providers as we would wish for the population. So Binghamton General does deal with a lot of, not just Broome County, but the larger Southern Tier region in extreme situations. So I'm actually really looking forward to helping with that population because I think it's an underserved population in the community.
And I know that Greg Johnson, our previous chaplain, had started doing some work within Binghamton General, especially in that kind of environment. And so, what are your thinking as far as that's concerned? I know that you had some I was involved in hiring you. And bringing you on.
You're like, full disclosure.
Full disclosure. So I know that you have had some experience working with that. So you want to talk a little bit about that and what your vision is for the program going forward?
Sure. So I worked at University of Louisville Hospital in Louisville, Kentucky, while I was a seminary student at Louisville Presbyterian Theological Seminary. That's a mouthful. U of L was a level 1 trauma hospital and an education hospital. And while I was doing what's called clinical pastoral education, which helps pastors learn about pastoral care, but also helps chaplains to be able to become chaplains, I was working on the mental health wing at U of L with some pretty extreme cases and people, and was hired on beyond my 1 unit to stay on for 2 years. And the things I learned there included that people just want to be seen as people.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems so basic, but
Right.
But a lot of times we marginalize those with folks with mental health issues or concerns, or some of it's biological and hereditary, and they just get seen as outsiders and problematic. So at that time, I'd created workshops for them to just sit and talk about. We started with coloring or singing or drawing. I used children's books. A lot of times we think about children's books just being for children.
Right.
Children's books are so good to get at core issues in a very quick period of time that adults can understand. And so we would use that as sort of a springboard to talk about where they were. And I'm hoping once I get to know the staff and the community at Binghamton in general to start to see if something like that would work in this community too. Just to get people thinking and to open up and to see that they're worth something.
Right.
And also to help them on their own journey with mental health concerns. I think quite often when you get marginalized, you just start to think, well, I'm just a terrible human. And it's
Right.
So I want to help them to be able to see, no, you're not a terrible human. We all have issues and problems and difficulties, and how can we be on this journey with you at this particular time?
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up children's books, because that's been part of our jail ministry program for a long time, has been reading children's books. And so the literacy rate of some folks isn't high enough in order for them to really get into a novel or something like that. Oftentimes they come with a 3rd or 4th grade reading level anyway, and so when you have them read that book, what we've done with them in jail ministry is we've had them read them onto voice recorders for their children at home, so that they learn literacy and they can teach literacy to their children at the same time. And we know that literacy is an important thing, but as you were talking, it hit me that not only are you teaching them that, because oftentimes the ones that come back to me are like Chicken Little.
Oh yeah.
There's the Little Engine That Could.
Mm-hmm.
Any number of other stories from children's books have that component to them, which is really about understanding my feelings, understanding me as a person, and it kind of breaks down that barrier too. So you're able to talk about yourself and your feelings in other kinds of ways that would work in a different kind of situation, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
That's what you're trying to do.
Absolutely, because I think children's books, it takes away like the presumption that you're if you're super educated, you're uneducated, whatever. It gets just right to the very heart of the middle of what the story is about. Jeff Kellman, I actually got to interview Catherine Patterson a while back, and I just remember that was one of the things that she talked about very clearly, is that a lot of times we think people don't understand core difficult issues, and we try to water down the message. But in listening to Catherine Patterson, a lot of children's books don't do that. If you're really paying attention, they get right to the core of the issue. And for a lot of adults, whatever age and stage we're at, sometimes we just need to have it laid out in a basic way.
Right.
It's interesting you were talking about the reading stuff, stories that this is a side note, but my sister is being deployed, and one of the things that the military is doing now is having her, there's an organization that's giving her a book, and she'll read it, and then the military will send it back to my nephew so he can hear her voice. So it just goes to show how much the human voice, whether we're together or far away, that children's books and children's literature can have a part in that. So
yeah, it's really kind of a neat thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then, you know, it also creates community too. So one of the cool things I found, at least by especially with children's books, is that it's a cross-generational thing. You know, you're sitting there with a bunch of kids doing a children's message, and you have a book. And it's amazing to me when you bring out the book, these kids like come around you and they're like sitting around trying to look at the pictures or trying to read the words themselves as you're going through the book. And it really is a special moment especially for pastors, you know, when you have the kids doing that. It's but you know, if you're dealing with mental health issues and people too, it can create that kind of community as well. I find that to be a great thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, as far as like the atmosphere and the cultures of both Binghamton General and Wilson that you'll be going into, I know that you've talked to Bill Fitzpatrick, who also works in pastoral care in the area. What kind of excites you about that?
Yeah. I think part of the reason why I like pastoral ministry is that I like doing different things. And I think that pastoral ministry allows me into spaces that I wouldn't be welcomed into otherwise. Like being on an encounter program. Like, you know, but truthfully, though, the two hospitals do have different needs and concerns. Binghamton General does get sent in a lot of like trauma and people with specifically more complicated diagnoses, and also folks who are nearing the ends of their lives. So all sorts of different things that way. And I'm looking forward to sitting with people right where they are in that. A lot of times when we're in those spaces, we do become more reflective about our lives, our faith journey, and whatever that looks like.
Right.
And also, it's easier to talk to somebody who's not necessarily, it's just so ironic for me as a pastor to say this, but who isn't necessarily in your faith tradition, to just be able, it's like if you ever lived in New York City or you visited New York City, you sit on a subway train and somebody has a full conversation about their whole life,
right,
and you never see them again, or you've been on an airplane. You know, I think there's moments like that happen in hospital situations, just to be able to acknowledge and be heard without judgment, and then be able to go back to the people that surround you in your faith tradition and your family and your friends and community. So you've had time to process that. Yeah,
there is some comfort that a person gets into in being anonymous, right?
Right.
So the pastoral presence is a safe place and a safe environment for them to be able to make that distinction about themselves, right?
Right, and there's confidentiality that
right.
goes alongside that too. So it's all around. It's for the person who's there and what their needs are at that moment. So,
and pastors know that confidentiality thing because
absolutely,
it's important for their congregants to know that. But outside of that, you know, HIPAA regulations and all this stuff that people are talking about as far as the you know, the hospitals are concerned, require it, you know, even more so than at church. Like at church, I can't imagine, you know, how many times have you had a pastor, you know, like a prayer request that kind of goes into great detail about themselves, you know, and at that point it's, you know, this is the congregation, right? You don't have any privacy left, but you can't do that in a hospital, right? It's that's an added level of security, I think, that than even what you've been exposed to in pastoral ministry.
Right.
So how do you how do you negotiate that, I guess, is the question.
Well, in my previous community, I served on the ethics board at Good Samaritan Hospital in Mount Vernon, which is part of the Good Samaritan St. Louis hospital system. So those are actually questions that were asked. I remember doing a training with some of our volunteer chaplains, and it was a more rural community, so they were used to people telling all their business. I mean, so when I remember one of the questions that came up quite often was, what do you mean I can't talk to my neighbor so-and-so about her thing that I just literally saw her in? And they were like, no, you can't do that unless they bring that up. That's not yours, that's theirs. And
right.
We won't be able to serve here if you can't do that. It was a conversation. But I think, and so yeah, that's been a shift, right? Like HIPAA hasn't existed forever. I think quite often we think that HIPAA has existed forever, but being in a smaller community, I learned very quickly that's not true. But I do think it allows people who wouldn't necessarily speak to a chaplain or talk to somebody outside of their own realm, have the freedom to do that on their own terms.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was pastor in Iowa when they stopped calling people whenever you had a person from your membership inside of the church, so they usually called the pastor, and then they would tell the pastor, you've got 3 people here. And they stopped doing that at one point in time. And so all of a sudden I stopped getting these phone calls, and then I start getting criticism from people. Why aren't you coming to visit, before surgery or whatever? And I said, well, because I don't know.
You have to tell me. Yeah, I'm not allowed to just...
I'm not allowed to even see a list anymore. I used to get a list, and then now I don't get anything, and it's amazing, that's been a huge change in the last 30 years. Yeah. So it's important for chaplains to honor that and to be that presence at that point, but also to encourage people that if they want to have their pastor come visit them,
absolutely,
that they need to make that phone call themselves.
Absolutely. Yep. And I've appreciated on the other side of the chair when a chaplain has identified someone as part of a faith tradition, and whether the pastor knows that or not, or that chaplain has a relationship with that pastor to say, hi, I have a patient who identifies as, I'm going to use Presbyterian since that's my faith tradition. And I've always appreciated when they've been like, they said that they're attached to your congregation, and maybe they were, maybe they weren't, but maybe they're baptized there, or maybe not, but that's not the point. It's that person identified in that time, right. And to have a chaplain to sort of be an intermediary conversation person for them to be able to get the care that they needed. So, and of course that all comes with the permission of the patient, not just rolling forward, So, I'm looking forward to seeing how to facilitate that with our community and the broader community of faith in whatever way that they can be connected with their faith traditions.
Now, one of the other roles of the chaplain for the Council of Churches has been to help enable people to do ministry in the hospitals and do it in the correct way, and facilitate volunteers and train volunteers on how to do hospital ministry and those kinds of things. You want to talk a little bit about that, about how that role falls and what your plans are?
I'm really excited, actually, about that, to see who has a heart for ministry. And I think that comes in all sorts of shades, colors, and packages. I would for sure have that same conversation I had in Mount Vernon, which is, we want you to be here with people, to be a non-anxious presence. That's a buzzword that is used in chaplaincy, but to not superimpose your own feelings or perspectives on those folks, but to literally to stand in the divine space between you and them, and to not superimpose what you think should happen, but instead to be present with them in what they need. And I think that would be a starting place. The other part would be a reminder that this is a hospital, so you don't get to spread everybody's business.
Yeah.
You don't get to put it on social media. You don't get to tell your next door neighbor.
Yeah, hold it up the camera. Look who I'm with.
Right. But also that what they're doing is a gift.
Right.
And to remind them of that.
Yeah, and that's an important role that chaplains play within the hospital. It's to remind people that we, while we come in with a lot of expectations about, where the person is inside of their own life, you have to let them be themselves. Mm-hmm. And feel what they feel, and not necessarily superimpose your own experience on them. So you don't come in with a whole list of, When I remember when my father died, and having to meet with a chaplain, and the chaplain, instead of trying to lead people, was trying to read into the situation what they were dealing with, and I just didn't like that. I didn't think it was appropriate. I thought, that instead of trying to get people to sign a DNR or anything, you have to first just be with them.
Yep.
In the muck, and that's never pleasant. And you're not looking for the signed signature on the bottom of the sheet of paper, but you're just trying to be there, and that's harder, I think, for a ministry than knowing what the end result is going to be, right? Mm-hmm. And how do you do that?
You sit, you listen, you see people as being people, and you don't superimpose your own stuff. I mean, it seems like such a simple response, but it can be really complicated. But if you can do that, it can make all the difference in the world for people.
And even with the hospital staff. Now we really don't have enough time to get into this, but the hospital staff is another one where, you don't want to just get them cleaned up so they can get back in. That's not the role.
No.
Yeah, it's to journey with them.
Right. And that's where relationships are built, right? I mean, it sounds like whether it's a chance meeting for a one-time thing or it's for an over-the-time period, whether it's with a patient or a staff member, it's all about relationship. And relationships take time. And for longer things with staff, in shorter trauma issues, it's going to be quick and intense. But both are important, and mostly just to respect people where they are. And I think the world can maybe learn a little bit from the world of chaplaincy about seeing the humanity of people right where they are.
My guest today has been Rachel Helgeson. She is the new hospital chaplain. She is also the pastor at Northminster Presbyterian Church. Thank you for being on Encounter today, and for the work that you've done for the last 4.5 years as an Encounter host. And to all of you, I would hope that you would be kind and gentle to each other.